heard from Dr. Bill Leonard about what makes Baptists unique historically. And this week, we have the pleasure of hearing from 4 of our Knollwood members, also ordained ministers, about their personal and vocational Baptist identities. So we heard from the academic point of view, and now we get to hear from some of our very own community. Keith Burkhead, Peggy Haymes, Harvey, and Linda Browne. I'm going to briefly introduce them, and then we'll get to our conversation. So Keith Burkhead was ordained in the fall of 1986. He completed a year of CPE after seminary and then worked for 6 years as a hospice chaplain and grief counselor. He burned out doing that and switched careers, getting his MLS to work as a librarian, which he has been doing since 1995. Keith is originally from Birmingham, Alabama. He and Ginger, a member of our meals teams and a wonderful volunteer with our children's ministry on Wednesday night, among other things. He and Ginger have a son, Christian. They live in Greensboro and make the drive west to attend Knollwood, for which we are so glad. It's so wonderful to have you, Keith. Peggy Haymes sits next to him. She was ordained in 1984 by her home church, First Baptist Church of Winston-Salem, in spite of the 1984 SBC resolution telling them not to do it. Not to just, they didn't say don't ordain Peggy Haymes. They said don't ordain women. Just important clarification there. She has served in her time as a minister as an interim pastor, associate minister, in which she was Matt Jameson's youth minister at that time, the first editor of Reflections Daily Devotional Guide, which we still get here at Knollwood. She is a licensed therapist, a grief workshop leader. She has been a hospital chaplain. She's a writer. And now she is a coach for churches and clergy through Pinnacle Leadership Associates. And her current Pinnacle project is creating Navigating Griefland, a grief support and education group for churches. So welcome, Peggy. And then sitting next to Peggy is Harvey. Don is a born and bred Virginian, having been ordained in May 1979. Not 1779.
I am a Virginia Baptist after all.
Excuse me. 1979 at Jonesboro Baptist Church in Roseland, Virginia, his home church. He has more than only 45 years of experience as a pastor in Virginia and North Carolina. He has been with his family a missionary in Santiago, Chile, and most recently Don has served as a consultant and transition pastor with the Center for Healthy Churches. Don and Connie, his wife of 43 years and a retired educator herself, moved back from Virginia in 2020 to be near their adult children and their families, Corinne and Justin, and to reconnect with Knollwood as their church family. And we are so glad that they have. Welcome, Don. And then last but definitely not least on the panel, we have Linda Browne. Linda has served as chaplain at Salem Town since 2004, almost 18 years. She and Dale joined Knollwood in 1982, and they have 2 young adult daughters who grew up at Knollwood, Virginia and Meredith, and a 13-month-old granddaughter, Isabel. Linda was part of the inaugural class of the Wake Forest University Divinity School and was ordained at Knollwood in 2003. So this is our panel, and as I said before on a previous Wednesday night, these are 4 individuals of many in our church who could be up on this stage. We really do have a wealth of folks who are committed to, trained to, well experienced in thinking theologically and thinking deeply about spiritual formation. So we're happy to have you 4 among us. I'm going to take a seat up here next to them, and I just get to ask them some questions. So I'll start with Keith, and I'll start with the question, what was your path to ordained Baptist ministry? Just tell us a little bit about how you got to that place.
It was a gradual understanding. I did not have a call out of the blue like some people seem to do. But I just came to gradually understand that God was calling me to chaplaincy ministry and did the things necessary to do that. And part of that was being ordained.
And you had grown up your whole life in Baptist churches?
Please don't hate me. I'm as Southern Baptist as they come.
No.
I know Knollwood is not connected with the SBC, but I definitely grew up in Baptist churches all my life.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we have a lot of folks who are connected to the SBC in terms of lineage and in terms of upbringing, and in terms of probably a lot of family members and friends who are very well connected to the SBC. So, yeah. Okay. Thank you, Keith. Peggy, what about you? What was your path to ordained Baptist ministry?
Well, mine was a little more winding than yours. I brought a visual aid. This is the Bible, the New Testament, that my home church gave me when I was 1 year old. And you can tell it is such a great Bible for a preschooler.
It goes in the mouth.
Yeah. Mine is just such a Baptist story. I was a teenager in my youth group. We were at Ridgecrest for Youth Week. It was the last night, so the worship service was the decision service. Can anybody guess what hymn we were singing? Just as I am many, many, many times. And I felt this strange nudge, which didn't make any sense to me because I'd been baptized several years before. And the only other decision that was open was ministry. So that night I asked my youth minister, do you think God might be calling me to ministry? And he said, well, let's talk about it. So we talked about it over the next few years, and I talked with my pastor about it. And when I was a teenager, when I was like 16, I shared that feeling of calling with my church and received much blessing and affirmation from them. My pastor had left to become president of Southeastern Seminary, so I wrote him, and Randall wrote me back and said, somehow, somewhere, some way, I knew you would do it.
So you really received support from your small church, your church community, and from your family and family as well, or?
Support and blessing, family, university, seminary, everybody except the SBC.
Thank you, Peggy. Don, what about you, your path to ministry?
Okay, well, I also grew up in a church, Virginia Baptist Church, Jonesboro Baptist Church, which is actually older than the Southern Baptist Convention. It was formed in 1845. My parents and my grandparents and my great-grandparents had been members of that church, and on my mother's side, my grandparents and great-grandparents had been members of another old Virginia Baptist church. So I've always said, I guess you could say I'm kind of a dyed-in-the-wool Baptist. I used to say I was Baptist born, Baptist bred, and when I die, I'll be Baptist dead. I have to sort of qualify that these days, though, when we talk about Baptist, because in light of what Bill Leonard said last week about we don't all sing the same tune as Baptists, and I've had to learn through the years to adjust and reconsider what Baptist tune I like to sing. So my calling, I always say I sort of start, when I think about the journey to ordination anyhow, back when I grew up, Bill Leonard mentioned last week about one of the distinctives of us as Baptists through the years has been baptism. And we had a little bit of a conversation about immersion. There are two definitions in Webster's dictionary about immersion. One is to dip or to submerge, or as Grady Nutt used to say, a Baptist comedian years ago, put them under until they bubble. And that's kind of was one thing for me anyhow, as far as the experience of immersion. The other definition that Webster's give is to be involved in or dedicated to an activity or a purpose. So really both of those sort of applied to me growing up. I was literally immersed in the water when I was 10 years old as an act of faith and response to the calling of God in my life. But that also sort of began, or at least continued, the journey that I consider to be immersed in the life of the church and in the life of following Jesus. I was sort of a weird kid growing up. I was one of those kids that would be every Sunday school teacher, at least youth Sunday school teachers' dream and nightmare. I was the first and sometimes the only one to answer my Sunday school teacher's questions, and I was usually the one that asked questions that he could not answer. And so those were sort of, at least as a teenager, I took very seriously my calling as a Christian follower of Jesus. I told Catherine the other day, I had a habit when I was a teenager anyhow of traipsing up on the hill behind our house on the farm and sitting and enjoying the vista of the river and the mountains in the distance near the farm where I grew up, and just lying in the grass and watching the clouds and communing with God. Now that's kind of an unusual thing for a teenager. My sister used to laugh and call it Meditation Hill, and I guess I was sort of a weird teenage mystic. But those were the years when I really felt drawn to God, and I was thankful to be brought up in an environment that cultivated the faith. My church and all of the activities that I participated in when I was a kid, Sunday school and church training and RAs and youth music and all of those things. I see some of you nodding, know what I'm talking about. That cultivated a deeper sense, a deeper awareness of God anyhow in my life. And then even beyond high school into college, finding my way into Baptist Student Union. I did not know that even existed before I went to college, but I was very thankful for a pretty little girl that invited me to BSU and found a group of dedicated, really on fire followers of Jesus that helped me navigate the difficult years of college. Had a wonderful campus minister, a fantastic college pastor that served as a model and a mentor to me, that encouraged me to get involved in teaching a youth Sunday school class and leading a youth choir and those kinds of things. All that to say, those experiences and people through the years, looking back on it now, sort of work together to create a deep sense in me of calling. I believe as a Baptist we're all called to minister. We're all ministers. But the calling that I felt when I was in college was a calling to vocational ministry. And I can remember, we used to say it in Baptist terminology, I surrendered to the call to ministry at Walnut Hill Baptist Church in Williamsburg, Virginia in 1977. Quit my job as a teacher, enrolled in seminary, and worked as a youth minister. Thought I was going to be a campus minister. Did youth ministry in a couple of churches while I was in seminary. Decided that's not the path that God's calling me to, and ultimately landed on being called to pastoral. So I requested ordination at my home church and was ordained in May of 1979 by my home church. I'm very, very grateful for all of the people and all of the experiences that worked together to lead me to that place.
Thank you, Don. Thank you so much for sharing that. And Linda, you came to ordained Baptist ministry not at a young age, not at a traditional age of coming maybe right out of college and then into seminary. Yours was a little bit of a different path.
My path is different from all of them. It's because I'm grafted on to the Baptist church happily. I grew up in a warm, loving Methodist church, North Decatur United Methodist Church in Decatur, Georgia, and I always had a sense of identification with the minister. I was asked to read, to be the liturgist and read scripture, and I just always wanted to be a minister. I went to Mercer University in Macon, Georgia, which was Baptist. Yes, yes, you were very close to a lot of those professors at Mercer, and it was filled with Baptist academic people. So I missed out on all that whole Southern Baptist controversy, and I never felt the tension between academics and Baptists. To me, it was just obvious. So I had a lot of, I majored in Christianity. They didn't even pretend to call it religion. It was just Christianity and psychology. I remember, though, one of the psychology professors saying, "Why do you want to go to seminary if you're just going to get married and have kids?" And I didn't even answer him. I was like, I'm not even going to answer that. He just didn't know me. But we got married right out of college, and I moved out of when I graduated, and Dale had 2 more years of medical college in Augusta, Georgia. And then we came here to do his residency, thinking I could do seminary, but when I got here, I realized, I was very naive and didn't really ask for help, that the classes they had in pastoral care, the work they had, across the street from Baptist, wasn't the divinity degree that I needed. And so then I had a crisis. What am I going to do with my life? This is what I was counting on. Eventually I got a master's in counseling. Well, first, for 1 semester, it was a master's in religion, and then I realized this is not what I need. But it is how I met Ted Daugherty, and Ted and Becky Daugherty, so that was wonderful. But anyway, I got a master's in counseling and did that for a couple of years at Charter Mandela with teenagers and their families and children. And while that was suited partway to me, I still felt this calling to be a chaplain because of my one of my youth ministers was doing CPE. So I just thought I knew all about chaplaincy at a really young age and just kept on. So we joined here. I had worked for a Methodist church after college, and the minister and he didn't supervise me well. So when we came here, I said, let's try your denomination. It was so naive, but it was wonderful. Let's try your denomination, Dale. So we came to Knollwood, and another church that we liked here was Baptist, but wouldn't accept my baptism as a Methodist or ordain women as deacons, and of course not as ministers. And Dale said, we'll just join, you'll join and I'll just attend. He went, we won't do that. So good for Dale. And then we found Knollwood. So I was here and I waited 11 years while Dr. Harrelson and then Dean Bill Leonard began the divinity school. And meanwhile, I had the 2 girls. And growing up and doing work here and studying, but immersing myself in those kinds of questions that have no answers. I'm still pretty obsessed with that. So So finally I could enter divinity school and went in the first class and then started to pursue ordination. And I was ordained between my first and second year of clinical pastoral education at Baptist. So I guess I could have gone to Duke down the road. I never even considered driving that far because then I had the 2 children. So it eventually all worked out, but that's why I was 41-ish when I was ordained. So I felt like the old woman on campus with my Greek flashcards during divinity school, but I got that degree.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you, all of you, for sharing your stories of a little bit of how you were brought up in Baptist life or grafted onto Baptist life and made the decision that ministry, vocational, professional, ordained ministry was for you. And just a note about why I asked for ordained ministers, because I believe with Don so strongly that we are a priesthood of believers and we are all ministers, lay and professional for sure. I do think that to commit one's vocational life to public identity in the ministry means that you take that claiming of a denominational identity just one little step further. Because when people ask you, what do you do? What is your work? That will be the first thing that you say. So I did want to dig in with all of y'all. After you've told a little bit about your path to ministry, really the central question is, now, what does it mean to you to be a Baptist? You are here at Knollwood Baptist Church as members. You claim Christian identity, you claim follower of Jesus identity, but what is for you that Baptist distinctive that keeps you here in this congregation and keeps you not only willing, but perhaps even proud and excited to say, I am a Christian of the Baptist variety? So Keith, how might you answer that question?
I'll try. The thing that stands out most to me about being Baptist these days is the Baptist belief in freedom of conscience and freedom and liberty. I write a lot better than I talk, so please bear with me. It seems to me that much of right-leaning evangelical Christianity, there's an increasing tendency to forget, or maybe conveniently overlook, the fact that being a Christian is not the same as being a good citizen of the country. In fact, the definition of a Christian citizen often requires speaking the truth to the secular power about conditions in the country. One of our major political parties seems mired in a thoroughly non-Baptist idea that a certain brand of Christianity should be the religion of the state, and that government exists to enforce the beliefs and practices of that brand of Christianity over individuals in the state. Where does freedom of conscience and religious liberty begin? I would argue that both are built into the law of the land, the Constitution. Religious liberty is not for Christians alone. If anything, Baptists among all Christians should reject the idea that the state and a certain religion are compatible for the government of the country. That is the beginnings of religious fascism. Religious liberty is at the core of being American and being a Baptist. A misguided attempt to make Christianity as a requirement for being an American should be anathema to us all. I know Dr. Leonard is going to speak next week about white nationalism, so I won't go into that a whole lot. I would add that Christian nationalism is really white Christian nationalism. White Christian nationalism. Well, we should talk. If you've ever read, if you've never read The Handmaid's Tale, you should. It's a chilling portrait of the United States that's devolved into a biblically based theocracy that insists on taking the Bible literally to every sense and applying that to every aspect of society. It is an imagined place where the belief that to be American requires being a Christian has been carried out to the logical extreme. It's not a place I would want to live. And yet I fear we're on our way to being there. The reversal of Roe versus Wade, the barrage of anti-LGBTQ legislation, and the endless attacks on voting rights all carry the hallmarks of one race using the intersection of religion and government to enforce its way of life on all. The Handmaid's Tale is fiction. All the things I just listed are not. Religious liberty? Now let certain elements have their way. We must all and always be on our guard against the effort to make the United States something that it is never intended to be, for that leads to a concept of religious liberty that goes against everything that Baptists stand for.
Thank you, Keith. Thank you for expressing and sharing all of that. Peggy.
So obviously, I grew up very much Baptist and went to a Baptist college. That was part of my criteria in looking at schools. I did an internship in a hospital emergency room, and one of the chaplains supervising me was a Methodist minister. And he said, you know, you really ought to become a Methodist because as a woman, you're going to have so many more opportunities. And I looked at that and I considered it. I thought about it deeply. In my words back then, I decided I was too stubborn and too independent to have a district superintendent telling me which church I was going to serve. You know, I kept revisiting that question throughout seminary. Seminary introduced me to the richness of Baptist history. And I really fell in love with where we've been and who we are. At the same time, after I graduated from Southeastern, it was crickets. I didn't hear anything from anybody. I was selling clothes at Virginia Crabtree's women's clothing store, walking in every morning thinking, 3 years of Greek, 2 years of Hebrew, do you need a blouse with that skirt? Finally, I interviewed with College Park Baptist in Greensboro, and they were divided between me and one of my male classmates. And a woman on the committee, Dot Wedby, spoke up and said, you know, we say we support women in ministry. Maybe we should put our money where our mouth is. And for me, that was part of the gift of being Baptist, that church in Greensboro could make that decision. Yeah, in old Baptist language, if the Lord laid it on their hearts, like this church has done, that they had the freedom. Now, we got kicked out of the association for that and other sins. But the freedom of the church and the freedom of conscience, as Keith was saying, that just kind of settled into my soul. And so I think I'm kind of stuck with Baptists, and Baptists are kind of stuck with me.
Thank you, Peggy. I'm hearing themes of freedom. Freedom of soul, freedom of conscience, freedom of faith.
So what do I like about being Baptist? One word. Freedom. Walter Sheridan, I think 4 fragile freedoms, many of you know. Soul freedom, which is what you referenced, Keith. Church freedom, autonomy of the local church. Bible freedom, freedom to read and interpret under the guidance of the Holy Spirit, Scripture. what's the last one? Religious freedom. Thank you for sharing that also. All those, I think, are very, very important. But I wanted to focus on one tonight that has personal significance to me and to my wife, Connie, and that is soul freedom. I was raised in a Baptist culture that encouraged me to think for myself. Boo Bryant, my Sunday school teacher in high school, he was a wonderful Bible teacher. And I can remember him saying time and time again, so how do you read it? What do you think? And even when I went to seminary, my professors, I went to Southeastern, and that was the culture then for the teachers to share from their knowledge and expertise, but also to ask me the question, so what do you think? And it wasn't that it had to be a certain way. It wasn't dogmatic. There was just this freedom to be able to look at Bible or to look at my faith and to be able to make my own decisions, to make my own choice. My parents told me when I was growing up that about becoming a Christian, you got to decide. That's not something we can do for you. And the same thing about when I was in college and I answered the call to ministry. Nobody coerced me. And so I think for me, the greatest thing about real Baptists is uncoerced faith. Now, when Connie and I were appointed as missionaries back in 1988, our denomination was embroiled in a controversy. Many of you know what that was about. And there were things that were happening and votes that were being taken denominationally that, in our opinion, we were very afraid about some of those freedoms being taken away, including soul freedom. It was a time when professors in seminary were being forced to doctrinal orthodoxy, and if they didn't go along, they would either have to retire or they may be fired. So this was 1988, and we were still in the midst of all of that when Connie and I felt so strongly about going to the mission field that we went anyway, naively thinking that they wouldn't do that to the missionaries. They might do it to the professors at seminary or denominational employees, but not to us as missionaries, surely not. And so we got on the mission field. We discovered very soon after that there was a movement afoot, indeed, in the denomination that would filter down to where we were in Santiago, Chile. And we realized that more and more we were going to have to ask the question by those that were above us in the denomination, what do you believe? And if it did not conform with what they thought was correct, then we may have to resign or face termination. So in 1992, reading the writing on the wall, we decided that rather than putting our signature on what we call a creed, because I'd always been taught that Baptists are non-creedal, and rather than facing that, we made the painful and very difficult decision to come back to the United States, and I resumed pastoring in a church in Hampton, Virginia. What we thought would happen did indeed happen. Baptists adopted what they call a Baptist Faith and Message 2000, which contained things that we felt were departures from historic Baptist principles. And even the missionaries were forced to sign the creed or retire or face termination. So I'm very grateful that even though it was painful, we made the decision to come back. Grateful for the journey since then that's ultimately led us to this wonderful place. This church that is, in my opinion, I'm not saying this in an arrogant way, Knollwood Baptist, we are the true Baptists. And we believe in that historic Baptist identity, I guess you would call freedom. So thank you, Knollwood Baptist.
Thank you, Dawn. Linda.
Well, that's just the perfect segue to me, because this is the only Baptist church of which I've been a member. This is the reason I'm Baptist. You are the reason I'm Baptist. Dale and I could have just went to Wake Forest Baptist or here, the only two places in town that would accept my Methodist baptisms. Or we could have gone anywhere, but we're here, and I'm Baptist because of this community that loves Jesus and loves community life and keeps on faithful inquiry and keeps on learning what it means to be a community. So, ditto to what you said. I didn't mention that I was baptized as a baby as a Methodist, and then when confirmation time came, I was a budding Baptist because I said, I want to be baptized again because I don't remember my first one. And they shouldn't have done it, but they baptized me again. So that's another reason why I really didn't need to be immersed for the, get in the water the third time. But, and also it was a little shocking being a Methodist saying, oh, that big pool of water. So I am grafted onto the tree, but I'm happily, because I could have pursued United Methodist ordination too, I think. And I did love my Methodist church, but I probably would have loved any church because I love Sunday school teachers, I love the church library, I loved all the pastors. My parents didn't go to church except maybe when I was very young. We have some Easter suit pictures, but otherwise they dropped me off. So for me to be a teen rebel, I rebelled right into the arms of the church. So I was kind of an odd kid too. Yeah. But that was okay because I loved it. How could you resist that God is love? I mean, I couldn't resist. Irresistible grace. So for me, being Baptist, the important parts especially is the freedom of the local church, because obviously we're not like many churches in the area, but also someone has to say it like James Dunn did, soul freedom. I can't quite do that. But as a chaplain who is Baptist, and I don't say that I'm Baptist unless somebody really needs to know, at an ecumenical retirement community, being Baptist is perfect because I think for myself, I don't have to worry whether I'm representing denominational creed. But in one sense, Baptists are perhaps the more honest Protestants, because the Methodists or Presbyterians and other folks I've talked to, they don't believe everything that they're supposed to believe as part of their denomination. So I think all of us take what we can live with and what feels true to us, but Baptists just make a living out of it. They just proud of it. But it is wonderful. It fits really well with me asking people, what do you think the scripture means? And when I preach, I'm not using the word I, but they know they can come back at that, especially in Bible studies. I say, this is what some scholars think. I'm not sure about that. How do you read it? So it's very similar. And it's, many people tell me at Salem Town, I'm really kind of not into denominations anymore. Part of that, I think, reflects a postmodern viewpoint. Part of it is the part of aging when you realize, can we love God and love each other like we love ourselves? And can that be enough? I am never, and I know you're not supposed to say never, but I'm never going to join a non-denominational church. I like denominations, but I know what they're talking about. They're saying there are some non-negotiable essentials to church life, and those are the two on which all the law and commandments hang. So to be Baptist to me is just to be profoundly open and yet know who I am I love Jesus. I pursue the presence of the Holy Spirit wherever I am. I'm in awe of our Creator God. And I don't worship Caesar. I don't worship politics, although I can get pretty hot and heavy about politics, but that's not my God, and I have to, correct that in myself. We worship God alone. I read the Bible, hopefully, through the eyes of Jesus as much as possible. So for me, I'm Baptist because of you and because of that freedom of conscience and the autonomy of our local church.
Thank you, Linda. Baptist because of freedom, and Baptist because of a community of free believers pursuing faith together. We have just a few minutes left. I wonder if there's any way that any of you would like to ask each other questions or just make any comments or share any resonance with anything someone up here has had to say this evening.
I will say really quickly that as a Methodist, we didn't grow up singing Just As I Am, and we didn't do points, with the RAGA system, but I did go to youth choir and Sunday night youth group, and again, strange kid, I loved it. We did not sing Just As I Am, but I rededicated my life every time we saw a Nicky Cruz movie. Because I had sinned again.
And I'll just add to what I said earlier, what I really wanted to say. I wanted to use the word cantankerous. I think James Dunn would say that, probably Bill Leonard also. That's sort of synonymous with who we are as Baptists. I'm just cantankerous enough that nobody's going to make me sign on a dotted line that I believe this or that. That contradicts what I really believe. So I really wanted you to hear that. I just think we have to have the integrity as Baptist Christians, and I'll put Christian first, to stand for what we believe, but not to be obnoxious about it, and not to be angry about it. And that's what pains me when I look on the Baptist landscape, and there are so many that have that kind of attitude. And I'm like you, and I think if we can just go easy on each other and love each other and love Jesus and love the world, and I think that in and of itself is magnetic. People will be drawn to that. That's what has drawn me here. It's what keeps me in church. I mean, there are a lot of people that are leaving church, but it keeps me here. It keeps me in church. So.
Well, and I just want to add, I was a weird kid too.
Kindred spirits here.
I was the one insisting that when we went to Virginia to see grandparents, I was insisting we had to get back in time for youth choir. But I also had that blessing in the people of the congregation. I talked about the ministers, but the Sunday school teachers who gave me those little butter cookies with the hole in the middle that you stick your finger through, and apple juice. And when I was ordained, I asked that the church librarian be on the ordination council because she had so welcomed me into that library and blessed my love of books. And the children's choir leaders, people who went as chaperones on youth trips and treated us like we were like people, even though we were teenagers. All of those people showed me that God was love. And all of those people showed me that I was loved and that I was valuable. And Linda, like you were talking about this community, for me it was the blessing of that community, and that said that you have gifts and God can use those gifts. So I am appreciative of many, many Baptists who shaped my life.
Those folks that you were referencing, were they at your ordination?
Many of them were, yes.
I think for me, just one more word about ordination, because I think people kind of think that's kind of a highfalutin, whatever, that sets us pastors above everybody else. For me, anyhow, ordination was an affirmation. It was a public affirmation of God's call in my life, and that people that were around me, the people that came and laid hands on me that day, were people that had been a part of my journey. That's why I was asking you if they were there, that they were a part of that journey. I'm thankful for that.
Any other last words this evening? Keith?
Sure. One of the greatest things about being a Christian for me is being a recovered fundamentalist. Once I entered seminary and became exposed to churches like Knollwood, I began to realize that God was much more than I had been led to believe as a kid. And the openness and celebration of all people is one of the most wonderful things about being a Christian and being a Baptist.
Thanks to you all for gifting us, blessing us with your just honest, authentic sharing of your journey. You've taught us, and your words will stay with us. Let's give them a hand of thanks.